Now, with coverage you trust, this is 10 News Conference.
The latest CNBC survey of the states with the best business climate ranks Rhode Island at 49th. While it's better than last year's ranking of rock bottom 50th, Rhode Island continues to be a bad place to do business. Another 49th ranking comes from a different survey, and this one says only Alaska has worse roads than Rhode Island. Despite all of this, Speaker of the House Gordon Fox and Senate President Paiva Weed say they've put in place over 30 new laws that will make Rhode Island a better place to do business. Does anybody believe them? Good morning, I'm Jim Chericani, along with our political reporter Bill Rapley. Our guest this morning on 10 News Conference is URI economic professor Dr. Leonard Lardaro. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by talking about the CNBC ranking. We've made leaps and bounds of progress. We went from 50 to 49.
At this rate, we'll be #1 in the year 2061.
That's encouraging.
It was. Well, I mean, all these surveys add apples and oranges, and they're really arbitrary. But this is what the world sees in a computer-based world. And let me quote a little bit from there. We're referred to in the survey, when they did the description for Rhode Island, a perennial loser in our study. Rhode Island finishes near the bottom this year for economy, infrastructure, business friendliness. In fact, the state is in the bottom 10 in every category except for cost of doing business, where it comes in 32nd, quality of life 20, access to capital 23rd. This is not anything new. Rhode Island has lousy rankings because we're not exceptional in virtually anything. We're just mediocre or really low rankings. And so even though you can drive a truck through the loopholes in a study like this is how the world sees us. We're now known as much for our unemployment rate and problems with the cost of doing business as our beaches.
Now, do you think it is just about the tax rates? Don't these surveys pretty much look at taxes to determine if it's a good or bad place to do business?
That's only one criterion, and what really disturbs me is all these different surveys have very different criteria. Some focus on taxes, the Tax Foundation, a lot of others don't, and we still come up very, very badly. In fact, for me, whenever these come out, my only question is, was Washington, D.C. included? So we have someone to beat.
There's a tendency in this state, when these surveys come out, they get poo-pooed by the governor, by the leadership in the General Assembly, like, oh, we don't believe them, or, we can't pay attention to them. Why don't they get paid more attention to?
Well, they don't have to. They'll get reelected for just doing what they're doing. And to me, one of the biggest problems with the state of Rhode Island is a mindset by the leadership. It's a culture of denial. What they should be asking, is it accurate? And if it's accurate and negative, then they're obligated to do something about it. But this has gone on for decades. Well, we'll just dismiss it. Oh, they're being negative, and they do nothing about it. The downside was in 2008, in a near global depression, possibly, we came very close. We were flat-footed, and we really haven't done very much since then. So we've got a long way to go, and the clock is ticking, because Rhode Island's fiscal cliff is within 4 years when Massachusetts gambling comes online, and our tax revenues take a major, major hit.
Well, now, the legislature certainly this year did make some efforts to, in fact, there was a program in the Senate called Moving the Needle. They wanted to change the rankings on these various business rankings. Did they just attack the wrong things?
Well, part of the problem is what none of these studies have is you need a council of economic advisors of professional economists that provide a vision and backed up by in-house due diligence. What I'm always amazed at, the state of Rhode Island does not engage in due diligence in-house. And so lobbying groups always have that.
They just don't
look at the numbers, look at what we need to do. Yeah, I made up a term for this years ago, due presumption. They assume things are going to turn out exactly the way they think, and they never do, because everything depends on other factors, and they don't take that into account. So we can do better. That's what's so frustrating to me. I know the state can do a lot better, but if you look at what they did, they took the early steps toward trying to get us with a plan and all of that. But the learning curve is steep, and it's obvious, and I don't want to be mean about this, they just don't understand what a plan is. That was proposed with 24 other measures. If they understood what they were doing, the plan would have been the 24 measures and things. So we've just got a lot to do.
So do you have a prescription? Do you know what would improve the business climate in this state?
Oh yeah, well first of all, you study it. You don't throw darts, and that's where the in-house due diligence is. We need in-house, no special interests, no connections. Look at our state from top to bottom, objectively, see what the problems are, because these surveys like the CNBC, they have value, but you can't put too much value. We have to look at this not only as the world sees us, but compared to other states that we deem are fairly successful, what do we have to do? We know the areas that have to change, and we know the basis for our glaring failures. I mean, Rhode Island has 49th in infrastructure compared to Alaska, but that's really misleading because infrastructure isn't just physical capital, roads and highways. It's also our lousy computer system, so we couldn't do the checking into was there fraud with income maintenance programs, and our human capital. The skills and experience of our labor force is really critical, probably as important as the roads, if not more so. And what do we keep doing? High unemployment rate, chronically underfund and grossly underfund higher education. So our de facto development policy is information age, hold the information. That's just not getting it done.
How do you get these economic advisors in there to make an assessment without any special connections? When, for example, during this session, I know for a fact that the TDI bill that was passed, it got passed as a favor to labor because they didn't pass the apprenticeship program that labor wanted. Yeah. And they had to placate a few labor leaders. And I know that's exactly why it got passed. So you have that going on up at the State House. How do you get around that?
Well, you have to create almost a cabinet, a council of economic advisors of high-level economists, and that's their job, to provide the vision, to define a plan, to keep looking at everything. When issues come up, should we do whatever it is, look at the actual benefits and costs, don't presume what's going to happen, and then provide the guidance. I mean, so we had, for example, something really silly, let's eliminate the sales tax. And of course, the special interest group had numbers, and the model they used was their tax elasticities were ideologically tainted. So it was an absurd overstatement of the benefits, but what did the state have? We actually have the capability to do it. Someone's in there who can do it, hasn't done anything. So, you know, these are the things, we have to stop that. We have to really have a meaningful vision and go forward. Kind of like what Rob Atkinson did for a while before he left, but, you know, on a grander scale.
Right, and that no longer exists. That's it was kind of like a council of economic advisors.
It was under Atkinson. When his successor took over, it got really ridiculous. They didn't do economic policy. He ran it into the ground, and they just put it to sleep.
But some of this requires leadership from the top, meaning the governor. So,
and the legislature.
And we have a governor that seems totally disengaged. He uses this rhetoric that's tired and old and really doesn't mean anything. He had a response to the CNBC poll that said basically nothing.
Right. Well, so does the legislature. Remember, the governor doesn't run the state in Rhode Island. He's number 3.
That, right,
and so you got to look at the legislature and the governor. And, you know, why don't they call the universities? Call us and ask about things like that. I mean, they grossly underfund us. We're used to that. So ask opinions, because we would have done something much more sensible of the Council of Economic Advisors, that whole, you know, Department of Commerce. You know, what you're doing, you're not giving the Secretary of Commerce the tools. You have a non-competitive tax and cost structure, you have an inadequately skilled labor force, a lot of other issues, and you have someone responsible, the governor. What's that person going to do? It's ridiculous.
We've got to take a break. Our guest today on 10 News Conference is URI economic professor Leonard Lardaro. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to 10 News Conference. Our guest today is URI economics professor Leonard Lardaro.
Can I just follow up on a little bit on the governor? He has been pretty consistent that in order to improve the economy in the state, it's going to take some time, and he claims to be trying to put in the building blocks, which is the education investment, the infrastructure investment. You know, it's been all about getting the money for the bridges and the roads, freezing tuition at least at the higher education, and continuing the funding formula for the secondary school. So aren't those the right steps to take?
If you only look at inputs, yes. If you look at outputs, not necessarily. And that's, as an economist, we always look at inputs and output. And so we don't have the time to go mañana with, and it's not just the governor, the legislature, to take our time, start to put things. We've got about 4 years before Massachusetts gets their gambling and we take a major hit. So, you know, yes, we're putting more money into higher education. We've stopped the decline. It's still grossly inadequately funded. And
Right,
so
but
to
I mean, you
argue
can't
that,
just say snap your fingers and come up with another $300 million.
no, but you can come up with more than that by reallocating expenditures, and you have to allocate expenditure more toward investment-oriented spending away from consumption-oriented spending. That's the real challenge. And so reorganizing an EDC or making a Department of Commerce, if you don't really clean up our tax and cost structure, if we don't focus on the right kind of things like investment-oriented spending, if we don't really try and improve the skills of our labor force, you're just spinning your wheels. So yes, you're going the right direction, but we don't have time.
But there is a contingent in this state that would say, look, in Rhode Island, we don't want to be like a Texas. We have a better quality of life here. There are more resources put into government programs here that help those who need those government programs than in other states. This TDI bill that just passed, we're one of, I think, 4 or 5 states in the country three states that has this. So that's, some people would look at that, that's a huge benefit. Be able to take time off from work and, you know, take care of your loved ones. So there's that argument on the other side, that this is a state that isn't going to be maybe the best business climate, but overall it's got a better quality of life.
Well, what was our ranking in quality of life? We went to 20th. Now, I think a lot of people in the state, I love the state, I'm not from here originally, but I think a lot of people in Rhode Island somehow think that if you live your life and die before going to Rhode Island, you die unfulfilled. And I don't think that's the case. It's a wonderful state. We have a really good quality of life. I think with the kind of things that are happening through time, we're going to have to fight to defend it. And so can we sustain the kind of government spending? Can we sustain these programs without building a more dynamic business sector? I think the time's running out because of the fiscal cliff we have.
But isn't that part of the culture here, that it seems that the legislature is more prone to fund government programs when somebody makes a case for the need for that program, as opposed to looking at the business world in Rhode Island?
That's why we're ranked 49th. That's why we're ranked 50th the prior 2 years. You just don't have an understanding of the prerequisites for success in an information-based economy. And we've been information-based now. This is our 26th year. Rhode Island has never been the same since we went post-manufacturing, because this kind of an economy is much less forgiving. You have layoffs all the time along with job gains. You have to be proactive. If you want economic success, you have to gain it. The mentality of a lot of our state's elected officials is, well, when the economy turns around somehow, 25 or 26 years ago, that was okay. And according to my current conditions index, we did turn around last year. This is it.
Well, so what are these investments that need to be made?
Well, a big one is education and skills of our labor force. Literacy, numeracy. You have to really, you know, fund college education more, make it more affordable. But you also have to clean up the business climate and make investments there where you might end up with less tax revenue in a short time. So when we educate the people, they don't move to other states or work in other states.
You just talking about tax cuts again?
No, no, you can have incentives. It might be tax cuts, doesn't have to be. Regulations, fees. I mean, those are two things Rhode Island excels at, and those are big negatives. We need to clean that up. And again, we're doing regulations supposedly at a snail's pace. We can do that. So without touching taxes, you can still make a major set of inroads by focusing your spending more and to get around the other costs of doing business, like fees and regulations and things of that nature. But you look at your tax structure, we could actually probably generate more tax revenue and not raise tax rate. If you just redistribute where the rates are, the deductions, all of that, we could probably do a much better job. Should we change the corporate tax rate? Well, again, there was a proposal to eliminate it. It's bold. And as usual, there was no in-house due diligence to back it up. So as always, we spin the wheel. One way to find out. And that's just not a way to run a state that you expect to do well.
Why do you think I mean, this is not unknown to them. They know they need to do due diligence. Why do you think they don't do it?
Because they don't have to. It interferes with their preconceived notions, essentially. And so if you look at the last election, which was really disheartening, the people who, a lot of whom were responsible for putting this economy in the toilet, for making us known as much for our unemployment rate as our beaches, what did the voters say in large numbers? thank you very much, keep up the good work. So why should they do the hard work? Why should they take the risks? They can keep going the way they're going, use intuition, which in economics is deadly, rely on very often, unfortunately, the numbers from the special interest groups. So I guess things have to get a lot worse, although, we got 3 years or 4 years until something happens, and maybe they'll feel, well, it's a crisis, so we can't let go of these people who got us here. We need something to turn this state upside down.
Yeah, because how do you change the culture? Because
Well,
I've been a reporter here now for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
It has never changed in that 40 years.
It changed once in 1991 with the banking crisis, I think. That was it. And I thought with the near depression in '08, that would do it. It didn't. So until the people of the state start demanding results, we're not going to get much because our elected officials don't have to. But that's what it takes for them to be leaders.
We've got to take another break. We're speaking with URI economist Leonard Lardaro. 10 News Conference will continue right after this.
You can watch this program again on our website, turnto10.com. We also have an archive of past programs. Click on Politics.
Welcome back. We're talking with URI economist Leonard Lardaro. Let's talk about the tolls. That's been a big issue. Having been here a long time and done, even at Channel 10 here, numerous investigations on the shabby shape of our roads and our bridges in particular.
And our human capital.
And our human capital. But the bridges are never maintained in this state. They never had.
Yeah.
It's a horrible, horrible situation.
Yeah.
So Chafee has a point, Governor Chafee, when he says we've got to find a way to take care of these bridges
Yep.
that we build. And so he wanted a toll on the Sakana Bridge. Didn't go over well at all. Don't we need? I mean, all the states around us have tolls on the highways and bridges. Why are we unique?
Well, we're not unique. I think if there's one thing you can say about Rhode Island, our culture is too consumption-oriented, which is the here and now today, and not enough investment-oriented. There's a good example of investment-oriented expenditure. Highways and bridges deteriorate physically. We know that. But the way it started out, well, we're going to put a hefty toll on there, and we're going to pay for a lot of other things in Rhode Island. If I lived there, I'd object to that too. Did we do in-house due diligence? Of course not. But that's the kind of thing we should be doing. So now they
have a commission together, and they're going to
good.
study how to maintain these bridges and look for alternatives other than tolls. But I mean, tolls
But where are we
going to
get the
practice.
money? I know. Where are we going to get the money? And 10 cents is just a loss leader.
Well, sure.
It's a placeholder. That's going to creep up and up. And so where will that money, are they going to pay for other bridges and roads based on that one bridge? I think there's a real equity and fairness issue there. But it's a great example of how Rhode Island approaches the world. We don't want to put away for the future. We don't want to have investment-oriented expenditures. We want to spend for today, the here and now, consumption-oriented, and that costs you in terms of future economic growth, and that means less future tax revenues, called fiscal dividends. So that's where we have a challenge. We just don't do well with that. It's a culture that our leaders have to change, but if we had that Council of Economic Advisors of economists who provide a vision, you don't then negotiate that. You say, we have to do this. The only question is how, and you look at alternatives based on actual estimates.
Well, but that's what happened. And they said, we're going to have to raise this amount of money to maintain the 4 bridges under the authority of the Turnpike and Bridge Authority, and the tolls are going to be set at X level. Was it $5 for out-of-staters?
Yeah.
Who didn't have easy passes, and $3.25 for 75 cents for Rhode Islanders seemed to be too much for Rhode Islanders to want to pay. But then the people got involved, and the uproar caused there to be a revisiting of those numbers.
Yeah.
And then we had all the shenanigans that first there were no tolls, then, as you say, a placeholder, so that there will be the ability to put tolls in later.
Well, we would have defaulted on those bonds, technically, if we have no tolls or any way to fund that. I believe those bonds would be in default. And where a lot of people in the state are kind of irresponsibly trying to walk away from 38 studios, you can't walk away from those other ones. And I think that's another part of the culture. Well, it didn't work out, we'll dump the 38 studios for something like this. We'll just, somehow the money will come from somewhere. to handle whatever the maintenance is. Why don't we find a much better way to finance our roads and bridges and get us out of the basement when it comes to rankings or
So
number
proposals
49?
were made. They include hiking the fees over at the DMV. The governor is adamant that there's going to be some revenue stream for the Department of
he's right.
Transportation, and he's put some into place. We're not selling bonds every other year now to match the federal highway funds. So those are positive steps.
Well, they're positive, but how effective are they? I mean, so if people use the road incredibly much, they're only paying then, let's say, $20 extra for a license. How is that going to be sufficient to fund it? How will that have fairness as far as it's a larger percentage of low-income individuals' income? There's a lot of issues they have to deal with there that they're not doing. So, we can do this. That's the point. This is not a mysterious thing beyond our capabilities. None of this stuff is. We don't have to be perpetually at the bottom. We can do a lot better than this, but we have to start the process, and we've got to learn as we're going. So we need to do better than this. We need to assess our infrastructure, both physical and human capital from top to bottom, and really ask the tough questions, be honest enough to look at what the strengths and weaknesses are, and go from there. I don't think our elected officials have the courage to look at the negatives.
Do you think it was a good move to eliminate the sales tax on liquor?
Well, the subliminal
a lot of people
isn't.
are happy about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, the subliminal bothers me a little bit. You're basically not taxing alcohol and things. And again, did we do an in-house due diligence study? Of course not, by definition. But I guess it's okay for the borders there. But people tend to interpolate that somehow, because the borders might do better against Massachusetts, then the whole state will be. That's not clear as far as that goes. And again, that would be a classic case where money from the sin taxes could go toward infrastructure or things of that nature, whatever. And so is that going to hurt revenue? I don't know. I'm not even clear it's going to help revenue. I mean, that's why we need to really study it.
Well, they're kind of doing it as a study. It's sunsetted, and they'll look at
That's
it. That's
called backwards. You study it before you do it, and then you go ahead and do it if it's worthwhile. Rhode Island, which doesn't do due diligence, now we're waiting several years, and it's the same mentality. One way to find out. That's not how you successfully run an economy, and that's why we're 49.
You touched on this earlier about the casino issue. It's true that it may even be sooner than 4 years that Massachusetts gets a casino or more than one casino up and running, and that's really going to cut into the Twin River Casino. And there's no plan that I know of to replace that revenue.
Right. And that's the fun of it, because I had to make up a word for that. Rhode Island's elected officials are parochial and myopic, your favorite word. And so the problem is they look at the here and now and only look at us. So very cleverly, Twin Rivers understated the economic benefits. So now they're going, oh, look, there's even more jobs than we said. I thought that was very clever, and I think our elected officials fell for that. But they don't have anything. What do we do within 4 years when Massachusetts comes online and it threatens our number 3 revenue source? That's why we have to improve ourselves, our economic climate, make ourselves grow more rapidly so we generate more tax revenue, make ourselves amenable to national growth, so at least we can start to fight this, because we're setting ourselves up the way we were in 2008. We'll be flat-footed. That's not the way you're supposed to do it.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Have you and your fellow economists in the state ever approached the governor, whether this one or another one, say, look, we could help you. Let us help you, and let us put together a council and see what the response was from the executive.
Well, I've spoken with several governors. I've never met Governor Chafee, but I've spoken with Governor Cheery a number of occasions and talked to him about that. I was on a commission group he did for taxes, Governor Almond, and doing that as well. So it can happen.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you
Our
for having
guest
me.
today is URI economist Leonard Lardaro. For Bill Rapley, I'm Jim Cherricani. Thanks for watching 10 News Conference. Have a great Sunday.
Well, Kacheri, the business government.